Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is Franz Sidney. We're so happy to have you today with Jonathan Kemp for his second episode and chat with us. So, welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's greatly appreciated.
It is greatly appreciated by all of our audience. There is a lot of response to the previous episode. But this time, we're going to talk about another problem. This is a problem or condition or issue that affects a lot of people that you know, from Whoopi Goldberg to Stephen King to Albert Einstein, Muhammad Ali, Richard Branson, Tom Cruise, and I could go on and on, Henry Winkler. So many people, even from new movies, etc., that they all have the same problem. This problem is that they have dyslexia. And people think, oh my gosh, yeah, what is it? It's not just about reading or not be able to sing the words properly or maybe the musical notes. There are loads of things you can notice even in an adult. You might notice that you have issues and you're trying to hide your difficulties when you're going to work. Maybe you're 60 or 70, you've never been diagnosed, but you're frustrated because you think, I'm taking so long to process stuff. I'm intelligent, but I cannot process stuff. Or you might think, well, I'm never good enough. I'm really not smart enough. But your thoughts are telling you, you are connecting everything and you're doing things. So you might think, well, I know I'm intuitive, I'm creative, I can do this, but I'm so distracted. Or I do weird mistakes, like it looks like I'm not listening and people think I'm not there. So it is not just reading, writing, and spelling. Yes, we know that this happens with dyslexia, and there are hundreds of types of dyslexia. It presents differently in a lot of people. And it does affect also a little bit of dyscalculia, the math, time management, your directions, how you may lose track of time, for example, like an artist start doing something and then it goes forever. And then because of all this, you might have a short fuse. You might be a little bit stressed with a lot of ease, or you might have just a normal, general low self-esteem, which might take you in the end to feel depressed. And so when you have all these things together, you think, what's going on here? You might go on medication, you might try all sorts of stuff. And sometimes it's just dyslexia. It's a different way of processing information. So once you know how you are wired, then you start understanding how the world will work for you. So you're not less intelligent. Actually, a lot of people who have dyslexia are way more intelligent than the average if you were to measure it. So here today we have a special guest on this because Jonathan was supposed to go really high in his life, was supposed to shine into things because he had this big pressure from his family. And yet he wasn't going there. And he felt, what's wrong with me? So I just want to pass the microphone virtually to you so you can start telling us, when did you realize that something wasn't quite right? And yet you had all the thoughts, processes where you were smart, you wanted to learn, but something wasn't right.
Yes, that realization in terms of studying. So I think the first signal, although I didn't realize that's what it was probably when I was about 6 or 7. And I remember at that time really struggling with exams. I had an assessment for a new school, and I knew I wasn't going to pass it. So when I was pre-10, sort of 10 to 20, we're talking 1960s, 1970s. And at that time, if there was any talk about dyslexia, I was unaware of it. And I'm not even sure I would have known what people were talking about. And sort of words like neurodivergent, again, that would have gone straight above my head. And I don't actually recall hearing that term until relatively recently, I guess, sort of around 2000. I think it sort of started to become a more formal way of describing, people's variances on how they process information, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, sitting here, age 64, looking back, in every part of our human body, there are variances. Some of us are strong, some of us are less strong, some of us are quick, some of us are less quick. And for me, it's quite natural that the brain would operate slightly differently for everyone. And within each one of the sort of brain skills, whether it's concentration or it's very much traditional learning, there'll be a variance. Some will be really good, some will really struggle, and there'll be a lot of people sort of around the middle. And so one of the things that happens now is people say, oh, well, everybody's self-diagnosing themselves. People are sort of making this thing up. And actually what I think's happened, and it's courtesy of social media to a large extent, but also advancements in neuroscience, is people have a much better understanding now of how the brain should work. And because we're now much more connected, on a peer-to-peer basis, so I can talk with my friends, I can talk with people older than me, I can talk with people younger than me, I can see what scientists are saying. I think it's this increased understanding about this very complex part of our body. And so really to the end of my sort of what I call my sort of primary school, so age 12, 13, I struggled. I was a bit of all or nothing. I thought, if I can't do well, I might as well not bother. The middle road didn't seem particularly attractive. And my parents were called to my school a couple of times because I was doing badly. I think at one point I just refused to study. And a lot of the angst, certainly around learning, I was to discover much later on, was because of one of the ways that I process information. And my processing isn't the same as other people. And that particular type of processing of information, or that particular type of brain behavior, we now know to be dyslexia. And you mentioned dyscalculia. Oh, can't even say I'm so dyslexic. It's dyscalculia, which is similar to dyslexia, but with numbers. Having said that, I often, not often, but I have problems with numbers in that when I listen to them, as I write them down, I'll actually write them in the wrong sequence, or I'll miss numbers out. And this only became really apparent when I was doing a master's degree in my mid-30s, and it was sort of heavy finance based. And I had to literally just check with a ruler every single sort of thing that I wrote down, because I knew that I would do this jumbling or miss things out. Going through school from 13 to 18, most of my contemporaries went to university. By the age of 16, there was no doubt in my mind, I was stupid. And again, now I look back, I know that that's quite a common impact for people with dyslexia, and that can affect us all our lives. So a different functioning of the brain, the reality of that can have a huge impact on your personal self-worth and your self-belief. Because, up until the age of 18, a certain amount of how we assess ourselves is by how well we're doing at school. And if we're regularly, coming at the bottom of the exam tables, there's got to be some reason for it. So either I don't understand the subject, or I'm not interested in it, or it doesn't make sense, or all three, or I'm stupid. And that was like really deeply embedded in my psyche. I left school. I didn't go to university like many of my fellow students did. And I did mainly manual work. So working in restaurants, working on building sites, worked as a cowboy in Australia for a year, which was beyond amazing. And then trained as a bricklayer. And then I actually joined the police. And what I've discovered much later on, it's quite common for people with dyslexia to go into sort of like people type businesses. So they'll go into things like sales, customer service, the services, whether it's the armed services or, police forces. Nursing is another one, because often we find it much easier, the sort of like the human interaction. And mistakenly, for quite a few of us, when we join the police, actually we then discover there's a humongous amount of studying to do, and also paperwork. And but anyway, I spent 12 years in the police. At this point, I was determined to do well, so I started developing exam techniques. What I didn't really understand, but I was vaguely aware of, that I was studying at least time and a half, if not more than double time, what everyone else was doing to achieve the same result. And you talk about, you were asking about tips at the end. And I think a big tip for me that I use is not to give myself a hard time. I know I have dyslexia. I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my late 40s. But I know one of the effects is that I'm slower at processing information and understanding information. It's just the way it is. So my number one tip that I apply to myself and I'd share with others is not to give yourself a hard time, and just allow for that extra time to achieve whatever you want to achieve in the learning sphere. At work, I also did things which at the time, I'm not sure that I thought they were strange, but I was aware of they caused me a bit of a problem. So there were certain things like listening on the phone I find really difficult. I need to see someone's face to be able to sort of have a conversation. And so what I would do is, and I particularly remember it when I was a sergeant, I'd be dealing with people who've been arrested, and I'd have questions and I'd want to phone the detectives up. But rather than phoning, I'd rather walk around the station up to where all the detectives were and speak to someone in person than actually do it on the phone. And I think that, again, it comes down to the processing. So when I'm listening to information, I can only listen to so much. And then if they're using like conceptual words, or if there's a lot of detail, at some point, my brain will just start going, and everything will be sort of like merging into each other. Whereas when I could see someone, I think it was just, I had more time to process, and I wasn't relying totally on my auditory skills. I'm trying to think of the other sort of effects. So certainly in the police, I didn't have a lot of confidence. In meetings, I'd keep quiet. Again, I think a lot of that was just the simple fact that I had this lack of confidence in my abilities. And funnily enough, actually, and I only found this out about 2 months ago. So one of the people I was in the police force with, she'd been a teacher. And this was during my probation, so my first 2 years in the police. And it was night duty. And she said a sergeant came up to her and showed her one of my reports and said, "What, you were a teacher, weren't you?" She went, "Yes." And he said, "Well, what do you think of this?" And she read through it and she just went, "He's dyslexic." She didn't tell me, but even if she had, it wouldn't have made any difference, because I wouldn't have known what to do with that piece of information. I mean, now I would. So, for example, in things like professional exams, particularly on the study front, you can ask for extra time, during exams, because of that time lag in the sort of regular processing of information. And also, I think greater awareness of having dyslexia is really helpful. So now I don't really hesitate. If I if my brain starts getting overwhelmed when someone's talking, I'll just say, I'm sorry, I have dyslexia. My brain's just completely chewed up what you said. Could you just repeat it? And the surprising thing is, I wasn't diagnosed till I was in my late 40s. And I think probably it was in my sort of mid to late 50s, I started being much more chilled out about saying, I'm sorry, but I have dyslexia. Can you just repeat that for me? And surprisingly, even still now, people are just like, oh, I'm really sorry. And it actually creates a nice little sort of human connection. So I sort of mention it and laugh and joke about it. But that's some of my experience with dyslexia. And it affects me because you were saying it's more than reading and writing. So that is an impact for me in that I will, when I'm reading, I'll miss words and I'll switch words. And when I'm reading, I'll jump sentences. And if you asked me, so like on these speed reading tests, you have to read like, I don't know, 10 pages and then answer questions. I can't answer any of the questions. It's really bizarre. And I think that's because when I'm reading, unless I'm writing something down at the same time, the information just sort of goes in and goes straight out again. And now I know that's the case, I'll sort of compensate for it. So now, does it affect me? Yes. In that I know, as I say, I need to allow this extra time. But one of the things that has literally transformed my life is AI. Oh, it's like a dream come true. And the reason I say that is because now I have on tap a copy editor and a proofreader. And I also have the technology will help me to design reports. So what that has done is take away enormous stress on a day-to-day basis, because historically I would write something, I'd then send it to a copy editor, I'd wait a couple of days, and I had a couple of people who were helping me with copy editing. I'd wait a couple of days, it would come back, I'd go over it again, I'd send it out again, it'd come back, and that could take a week. Whereas now I just know I'll do a plan. And actually this is tip 2. So the other thought I always had was that I couldn't write and no one would understand what I'd written. And even with the book that I've just written, I had the same process. So the way I get around that is I'll do a quick plan of what I want to say. I'll then type it up literally as if you and I were having a chat. So I'd be describing it as I would speak. And that has 2 really powerful benefits. So one is if I start thinking, oh, I can't write, no one will understand, I overlay that with another voice saying, just write as you speak. People understand people understand more or less what you're saying when you're speaking. So that gets rid of that fear. And it also helps me to get things done. Then what I will do is I'll probably use an online editing. So I have about 3 online tools for editing documents. And then I will give it to one of the AI tools. And I'll just say, I want you to be put on I give them a role. So I say, I would like you to perform the role of a senior strategist in a learning and development company. And I want you to go through this. Please, can you copy edit it, proofread it? I'll ask it to do it in using my style and language, which it's learned as time has gone on. And then the other thing I'll say is, please, can you write it in my own tone, voice, and not any sort of flowery sales type language. And then the final bit is English spelling. But, if you're in the US, you ask it to do US spelling. And it's like a miracle, 4 seconds later, and I'm just thinking, oh my God, this is so good. And what I'll then do is I'll read through it, make sure I agree with what's being said, make sure that it's using my voice. If I'm unsure about things, sometimes I might ask another AI tool to do exactly the same thing. But what was taking me like days, if not a week, to do something, I can now produce in an hour, 2 hours. So for me, as someone who's neurodivergent with dyslexia, AI is nothing short of a miracle, because it gives all that brain functioning, which I find difficult. I now have access to it through AI.
Oh, that's wonderful. There is a lot of criticism, and we are all very worried about a pervasive, let's say, way that AI is now everywhere is going to be in all the computer systems. So I done 5 weeks of AI production in all my previous podcast interviews, because we are analyzing what's going on. But I'm so glad that at least it's helping people to read, to translate, to summarize, to see what's wrong, is to see the tone, and to put the grammar back where we're expecting it to be when we are thinking it right, but then when you go to write, it is not there. So it's an amazing tool. And I wanted to, just before we go deeply into the system, I forgot to ask you in the past interview, Jonathan, how did this knowledge that you have dyslexia, so developing your tools and everything, enable you to fit in better within the mission that your family has made you to inherit? So your family had expectation because of being a Viscount. So do you now fit in better because you can work things out because you know what's the issue? Have your parents been kind of oblivious of this problem for years? So I imagine that with all the conditions, syndrome, disabilities, disease, the parents sometimes have no idea. They just say, "Oh, you need to work harder, Johnny." and just a quick thing. I didn't want to do 10 minutes of it, but was your family aware of dyslexia, and are they receiving it differently now?
Well, my grandfather and my father have passed away, but they were of a generation where there was very, very little knowledge about either mental health or neurodivergency. And even if it was sort of brought up, it wouldn't really be discussed. It wouldn't be discussed because there wasn't the knowledge or the understanding, or probably more importantly, the acceptance that these were genuine issues. So you described it very well. Pull up your socks, do better. You've only been back at school. I got a letter from my father once, I remember it. And I promised, I'm going to really work hard. I'm going to behave. And I got back to school, and within 2 weeks, I was in trouble again. And I got this letter from my father saying how disappointed he was in me. So I think, in fairness to them, there just wasn't the knowledge and understanding. With the rest of my family that are still alive, I think we all, I think we just understand things much better. But for the person who's, you were talking about expectations, and how does it help me to live up to expectations more easily or to a greater degree? And I think the big change is actually, for me personally, with my own objectives, my own aspirations. Because after I've been diagnosed with dyslexia, about 3, maybe, I don't know, 1, 2, not long afterwards, but maybe a year or 2 years afterwards, so I was early 50s, I just reached a point where I thought, I don't have to prove myself anymore. You know, I'm not stupid, but I'm not the best in the world, and I'm not the worst in the world. I'm just the same as everybody else, you know, good, bad.
Yeah.
And that was a huge shift, but it just came almost naturally. There was nothing, hadn't done anything externally for that shift to happen.
Yeah.
And I think it happened because that I'd had a diagnosis. It made sense. I'd accepted it. And that was one of the benefits.
Right. So inner acceptance, because there are some limits. We are genetically modified, you know, we all different. And this is very much polygenic. So it comes from a combination of genes. So I'm quite sure that if we were to do the ancestry DNA test or whatever and identify all the genes that are involved in dyslexia, you would find that most people have some of those genes. We have millions of genes.
Absolutely.
So we have some. For example, I'm certainly not dyslexic. I don't have any of these problems that you mentioned. However, if you try to give me the instructions to play a board game and you just tell me the instructions, I'll be just completely unable to function. On the third line, I forgot the first line. On the fifth line, I forgot the third. I'm like, what the heck are you doing? But then I say, can we just play this? If we just play it, I will extract the principles on my own. It's so much faster for me. And I'm also like a kinesthetic learner, so I'm just getting a lot more of an auditory information. So that it's one maybe of the genes working there. I say, well, I do not like lists of things. And yet I memorized entire books. When I was studying architecture in the Polytechnic of Milan, we had to memorize entire books, and I was able to quote word by word. So certainly I was not dyslexic. But yet I think that everyone has an aspect, like autistic. A lot of people have some of the characteristics, but they're not what we would call autistic. So I think there is like an umbrella and a bit of tolerance in society when people are slower or faster or they find it difficult would go a long way to make us, you know, more aware that we're all different and this is a joy. And for you, this has been a wonderful thing to find out what you have. So now you can not feel stupid, as you said, but feel like you're normal. You just process things differently. And you even came out with a modified method for taking the notes that helps you so much that now you have created a whole strategy for reading, taking notes, etc., which you have been using for training in lots of companies worldwide. Now, we mentioned a little bit last week, but it would be nice to go a little bit deeper because I know it's contained also in your book. So how does that help anyone, and especially those who have dyslexia?
So the book you mentioned that I've written, which is called Finding Peace of Mind, that's going to come out on the 10th of October. And in that book, initially I was just going to talk about mental health because I have a lot of experience with bipolar disorder, depression, addiction. But then I thought, actually, I don't want to write a separate book purely on dyslexia. So in the end, I decided to combine the two. And I decided, actually, I think it was last week, that all profits from that book for the first year from publication will go to mental health charities. And then the other thing I decided was I'd always had in the back of my mind that, one, I wanted to share my experiences with people who appreciated the knowledge around mental health and neurodiversity. So that was one, and I'm in the process of doing that. And then the second thing I wanted to do was to give away this technique, which I call smart wisdom, for free. And because it's like an integral part of my story, I didn't want to sort of keep mentioning it in the book and with people thinking, oh my God, is it like an onward sail and he's expecting us to do blah, 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 whatever. And I thought, well, actually, this is a good time to start to give it away for free. So I mention it quite a bit in the book because it's helped me enormously, and I'll explain how in a second. And then there's about 2 or 3 pages on smart wisdom, in a bit more detail. And at the end of it, I've put a code, which if you input that on my Smart Wisdom website, you can download the online course for free, which means you can learn how to do Smart Wisdom, and it's completely complimentary. So then so I'm very happy to do that, because then that frees me to talk about it to the cows come home, because I know anyone anywhere can get it. So Smart Wisdom, I started off with information mapping techniques, where you break everything down into single words. And then I sort of started to make small modifications on how to use it, where to apply it, how to apply it. But essentially, what you're doing, when I was using it in my studies, so I went and studied as a mature student. I skipped undergraduate degree because of my police management experience. I did a postgraduate diploma and then a master's in international finance, trade and shipping. And I nearly came in the top 10%, and they said it was one of the most remarkable things they'd ever seen. But I was using Smart Wisdom all the time. So principally in three areas. One, in lectures. So as I was listening to the lecturers speak, I was capturing the information, but rather than writing out sentences, I was capturing the key words and the key detail. So I wasn't leaving anything to my memory, which is what's suggested with some information mapping techniques, because I know my memory is appalling. So I'd capture the key words, the key detail, and then I'd link all this together. And the process of listening to those words, breaking everything up, reconnecting them, is what really increases automatically. You don't even have to try and do it. Automatically increases listening, concentration, focus, understanding, which is a key one for me. And they are all a natural byproduct of using the technique. I also used it for analyzing written material, and I also used it for doing plans for essays. And I now use exactly the same technique when, if I'm preparing any form of work document, if I'm doing a blog, I will catch my thinking using Smart Wisdom, but what I'm capturing is exactly the same. It's just the keywords and the detail. And I will capture it as I think. Say for a blog, I might spend, 15 minutes, 20 minutes on the plan. And then I will just type it up as I would speak to someone, and give it to my friend AI. And Bob's your uncle. Sorry, I have an English expression. I don't know if it's in America. We call it Bob's your uncle. I have no idea why. But what that means, in a small moment of time, I've got my blog. So what used to take me literally almost a full weekend, I now finish from start to posting within an hour.
Well, that's a tremendous achievement, saving time and feeling less stressed, and you achieve what you want to achieve.
Huge.
And you can bring your message to the world and say, this condition can be managed. It's not your fault. You're genetically wired to process differently, but here are your tools. And for this, we want to be so thankful, because sharing such a great thing, isn't it? You share, you grow with other people. So when the book will be out, will you still continue to do the training that you do with companies?
Yes. So with companies, I'll still do the sort of paid work, because getting the most out of Smart Wisdom in a corporate environment, there are some other things that you need to do. So I will still do paid work, certainly in corporates, because it's also a matter of then taking these techniques and applying it to specific roles. And that comes with experience. And I've got 20 plus years experience of doing that. But I will also, once I make so in the book, you've got free access to the online course, and the online course is identical to what I would teach if I was doing it in person. So it's really good quality course. But when I come to start giving it away for free outside of the book, then I imagine that probably my switch will go more towards education, and I will look at how can I explain it and demonstrate it from a practical learning point of view that younger people can think, oh yeah, this could really help me.
Yes, definitely, especially now because people go to school. And, Andrew Huberman was saying in one of his lectures last week, he was saying, when we have a lecture, the first 10, 15 minutes, half an hour, everyone is going wide eyes, they're interacting with the lecturer. The last 10, 15 minutes, everyone is rolling their eyes and they're dead. I mean, there is something about focusing their attention. So if you take notes, writing down the key principles, and then later you can maybe expand the notes again. You look at those principles and the whole sentence come back and you're like, oh, that's what, in a way, I've done that when I was in high school studying Latin and Greek. It was so hard to remember everything. So I would just take some notes while doodling. I was always doodling. It was a lot more helpful for me to doodle, not just stay still, because I would just go in another planet. And then I would go back to these notes and I would expand them home and write in calligraphy, ta, 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 and then I would study. And the professor would say, wow, you're the best oral test. We had oral tests in Italy, because I remember every word, but because I took very, very good notes of the basic stuff. Not every word, but the basic. And so I think that it's so good that you went down and now you are getting the fruits of all this work. Finally, after all these years, you're like, there we go. You are turning a challenge into a great opportunity to grow for you and for other people. And so I wanted to thank you so much for your time here, Jonathan. I know you're a busy person, but you took this time to bless the world with this. So thank you so much for being with us today. And you guys listening, thank you for being here for the whole of 30 minutes, 38 minutes. And I hope you will want to share this episode with all your friends, whether they're dyslexic or not. It doesn't matter, because this can help any student or manager, or even in a family when you're trying to discuss something. Why don't you break it down in principles? It's such a great thing. And also it's a nice, like a biography, like you learn how you find every challenge is a new opportunity to create something new. So thank you so much, everyone. And please share the show with everyone, subscribe if you can, and go check out Jonathan Kemp, his book, his work and everything. We're going to have links. And so watch this space. I'll see you all next week. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Very much.